In the episode I posted before the start of Operation Epic Fury, I laid out how attacking the Iranian regime might be a just war. The ideal and the real rarely, if ever, coincide. And that conflict is the subject of this episode of The Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. Welcome to another episode of The Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. I'm Chris Mayer, retired U.S. Cavalry Colonel and former instructor of the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College and prior faculty at the U.S. Army and the U.S. Naval War Colleges. This series of podcasts introduces enduring lessons of war, not so much for those who study war as a profession, but for anyone who wants to fulfill their role as informed citizens in our country's deliberations about war and peace. At the end of the last episode, I said that I would compare what we know about our campaign against Iran to the Weinberger-Powell doctrine for the use of American military force. I need to push that off for a week. The information coming out of Operation Epic Fury demands revisiting my initial assessment of just cause. I stand by what I recorded in episode 128 before our attack. In that episode, I expressed my opinion that humanitarian intervention was a valid argument for both just cause and last resort. I should say that my opinion was poorly received by some of my colleagues. Nonetheless, I stand by what I said in that episode, without reservation. Please also remember my caveat from that episode where I said that the reality of a military operation against Iran would probably look different than what I proposed. In the previous episode, episode 129, made only a few days after the start of the campaign, was based on the information put out by the U.S. government and widely reported in the press in the weeks leading up to our attacks. This information heavily weighted the increasing deaths of Iranian civilians at the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. In other words, the same justification I used for episode 128. Since the attacks began, however, and up until a day or two or so, the administration almost never mentioned stopping the slaughter of innocent civilians as a cause or an objective of the war. That means I need to reevaluate both just cause and last resort. The administration's rationale for attacking when it did is not entirely consistent, and this is itself problematic. The part that has been consistent in those justifications is that the U.S. and Israeli governments had credible evidence that an attack by Iran was imminent and that this attack would use all of the weaponry we have seen in use by the Iranian regime so far, striking targets throughout the region. This could have been devastating as the number of missiles, lethal drones, and other systems far outnumbered the number of counter systems available. This attack was to begin, according to some sources, within 10 days. And this is without considering reports from some sources regarding nuclear weapons. Those sources report that, although the U.S. strikes last fall were successful in ending the weapons development program, Iran had enough components still in existence to assemble several atomic bombs. I'm inclined not to believe that, but since this story is circulating, I should at least mention it. If an extensive regional attack was imminent, it would justify both the cause and last resort. That is, if the report is true. Now, I need to take a moment here to describe the difference between imminent and immediate. They are not synonymous. Immediate, of course, means about to happen, like right away. Of course, an immediate threat justifies an immediate response. Imminent isn't quite the same. Something is imminent if it is ready to take place and will almost certainly happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will happen immediately. An attack could be imminent if the opponent has the capability and the intent to do something soon. The attack will happen sooner rather than later. Whether or not something is imminent depends upon the intent and commitment of that opponent to the attack. My own analysis, based only on what is commonly available in reporting and my own training and experience, indicates that this claim of an imminent attack is probably true. If true, then the attacks of the first 24 hours and then throughout the first week reduced Iran's overall capability to launch such attacks by targeting launchers, storage sites, and most importantly, command and control capabilities. Given what the Iranians have been able to do over the past week, imagine what a general attack might have been like if all their launch sites, logistics trains, and command and control capabilities were intact and fully functioning. However, the cautionary clause is if true. As I prepare this, I have not seen any evidence released by the U.S. or Israel that confirms that claim being undeniably true. This is very important. This is more important than the consequence of revealing intelligence sources or methods. For example, in 1962, President Kennedy released intelligence products that confirmed the installation of Russian strategic weapons in Cuba, even though this revealed intelligence capabilities previously unknown to the public or to Russia. It certainly compromised future clandestine intelligence, but this revelation was necessary to establish the just cause of our actions then. Now, I admit that in preparation for our invasion of Iraq in early 2003, some of the claims made by the U.S. government were wrong. That's a subject for another time. But what is important that at least we presented information to justify the invasion. Now back to today. Today, and especially because of the mistaken narrative from 2003, the legitimacy of the attack absolutely depends on the U.S. and Israel proving that such an attack by Iran was imminent, regardless of compromising intelligence sources. Without that evidence, combined with the absence of citing humanitarian intervention, we can legitimately doubt that the criteria of just cause and last resort were met. Now, I said that I've seen things that infer preemptive attack was valid. The Iranian responses after the attack indicated that we did not have time to properly secure the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz before our attack. The danger to shipping and oil facilities in the Gulf states from Iran were already well known, especially since Iran has made several such attacks and interdictions in the past. Planning for an attack on Iran certainly included addressing that danger. We would have taken measures with the Gulf states to mitigate any such Iranian actions, rather than respond to those counterstrikes seemingly on the fly. Also, the lack of action by the regular Iranian armed forces against the regime or to protect the Iranian civilian population from the IRGC also indicates that we launched the attack before the proper conditions were set. Again, this is not evidence of an imminent Iranian attack, just inferences that we felt compelled to launch the attack before we were fully ready to do so. That said, it is entirely possible that the alleged imminent strike by Iran would have actually been a preemptive strike of their own. The military buildup in the region clearly demonstrated the capability and intent to use military force against Iran. It could very well be that the Iranian government intended to strike our interests in the region before we attacked them. But we found out and attacked them before they attacked us, before we could attack them. Clear? And what would Clausewitz say about that? Anyway, we need to come clean about the information that precipitated our attack. Unless something else comes up in the next week, I will review the Weinberger-Powell doctrine to analyze the current campaign. As a preview, during the Reagan administration, U.S. Secretary for Defense Caspar Weinberger defined the following criteria for using military force. 1. The United States should not commit military forces to combat unless the vital national interests of the United States or its allies are involved. 2. The U.S. troops should only be committed wholeheartedly and with the clear intention of winning. Otherwise, troops should not be committed. 3. U.S. combat troops should be committed only with clearly defined political and military objectives and with the capacity to accomplish those objectives. 4. The relationship between the objectives and the size and composition of the forces committed should be continually reassessed and adjusted if necessary. 5. U.S. troops should not be committed to battle without a reasonable assurance of the support of the U.S. public opinion and Congress. And 6. The commitment of U.S. troops should be considered only as a last resort. Now, I've given you something to think about until the next episode of The Ancient Art of Modern Warfare.